Scared for reals.
Hey, it's Chris O'Neill.
Adam Perry.
And we're here, 92 years old, Valentine's Day, Dracula. Todd Browning starring Bela Lugosi. Now, Adam, you've done a deeper dive into the history of the actual Dracula saga. So do you want to start with the novel or do you want to start with the movie?
Well, I'm going to start with the movie.
Okay.
Why? Chris, because it's my birthday and I wanted to.
Well, but it's also 92 years on Valentine's Day. The movie actually was released.
Yes. February 14th, 1931. We get Dracula.
93 years old, actually.
Yeah, 93. As I've said before in multiple shows, this is what starts our American horror saga.
Right.
The candle's lit, Frankenstein's the explosion, but it doesn't start without this candle being lit.
There was a little rumble with the Cat and the Canary.
Yeah, and the Chaney films. Like we said before, I mean, like a Chaney film was a Chaney film. A Todd Browning film was a Todd Browning film. Dracula was a horror movie.
Right.
It was a terror movie. The importance on our American horror genre starts literally right here, February 14th, 1931. Dracula by Universal Pictures, starring the legendary, the iconic Bela Lugosi.
But it wasn't supposed to be Bela Lugosi.
It was not
supposed to be another Todd Browning, Lon Chaney production.
Yes,
right?
Yes. There was actually kind of a race to kind of get the rights to Dracula between the big studios, MGM, Universal, and all of them, eventually being outbid by the Stoker estate to the Laemmles at Universal Pictures. And yes, it was going to be a vehicle for Todd Browning and Lon Chaney, the longtime collaborators with, the Mystic, the Unholy Three, the Unknown. The success was there. It was going to be another big movie for them, and then unfortunately the man of the thousand faces gets throat cancer and passes away.
But then there was option number 2.
Conrad Veidt,
would have been great.
Yes, as we know as the Man Who Laughs, the monster from Cabinet of Dr. Caligari,
which was his film debut.
And he's
later the evil Nazi in Casablanca.
Yep. And so he's building his resume. He's making a statement in these early pictures. And he actually backs out because he doesn't think he can handle the English dialogue. So he actually goes back to Germany at this point. And Universal is kind of stuck. Their first choice is dead. Their second choice doesn't want to do it. And the only person who does want to do it is a Hungarian actor who is playing the Count on Broadway at the time, Bela Lugosi.
Yeah, which seemed like an obvious choice. But no, let's try for John Ray, who was kind of like a drill instructor in All Quiet on the Western Front.
Yeah.
I remember him like a little bit from that movie, but I literally had to, who's John Ray? And at the time, I guess he was somewhat of a star, but he was always like a supporting guy. Maybe they're like, okay, this could be his big break. Ian Keith was mentioned, William Courtney, Paul Muni from Scarface. That's an interesting choice because that guy is probably one of the more versatile actors. I mean, went from Scarface to playing all sorts of different biopics, the prestigious biopics.
Right.
The guy could do any type of role. Chester Morris, Joseph Skilbrot was also mentioned. I cannot imagine him playing Dracula, especially after playing the father in The Diary of Anne Frank. It's just like, I don't see that. And then Arthur Edmund Carraway was also mentioned. Everyone ignored Lugosi, even though at the time when Conrad, they were trying to go to Conrad Veidt, he was also kind of vying for it, right? Am I accurate in saying that?
He'd been playing the Count on Broadway.
He heavily lobbied for this role.
He had 200 performances of Dracula under his belt by the time this movie came up. There's literally telegram letters from Carl Laemmle Jr., who was running Universal Pictures, and this was his pet project. And it's literally one sentence: not interested, Bela Lugosi. Multiple telegrams shooting him down, and to the point, they couldn't find anybody, and so they finally settled on Bela Lugosi. He ends up being the least compensated actor,
but he's also the benchmark from all Draculas ever.
Yes, yeah, but before we get to the impact, the legacy impact, let's talk about quickly the cast that follows around. And we got David Manners playing Jonathan Harker. David Manners at the time, he's kind of one of those, I don't want to say a stock performer for Universal, but you see him pop up also in The Mummy. You see him pop up in the Lugosi Karloff first collaboration, The Black Cat, and he kind of plays the same everyday Joe, super good guy. very clean, very whitewashed,
very clean cut, and slick hair, and
type character. Followed by Helen Chandler.
Helen Chandler got paid the most out of the whole
She got
cast.
paid the most,
and it's like I can't think of any other role that was really prominent with her. She was very popular at the time.
She was very popular at the time, but unfortunately for Helen Chandler, right after Dracula, alcohol becomes a major issue with her, and she becomes a liability for a lot of studios, kind of like a Colin Clive, where she only got kind of like the one shot. Colin Clive got a couple other shots, but his the drinking caught up with them fast.
Yeah, because she was very prominent in the silent era.
She was very prominent in the silent era, and to the point, she found herself wound up in a psych ward.
Yeah,
for her
she
drinking.
died pretty young, if I'm not mistaken.
Let me check.
Well,
yeah, she died. She died in 1965. Born in, so she was.
That's still pretty young.
Yeah, she was 59 years old.
Rough life.
Yeah, and then we got Dr. Van Helsing, played by Edward Van Sloan,
who didn't like this role. I found out.
Well, he did it to do it, but he was also Lugosi's counterpart on Broadway.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
so this is a role that he was very familiar with. That's the cool thing about this movie. You kind of have the story itself instead of based on the novel. It's based on the
play.
The play by Hamilton Dean. So and you got Edward Van Sloan as Van Helsing and Lugosi as Dracula after 200 some odd. And then there's all the second character actor who kind of steals the show in this movie. The legendary Dwight Fry as Renfield.
Man. He is so good.
He's so underrated.
He almost steals the whole movie away from Bela Lugosi at times. He is that good. It's not like, most of the actors at that time were very over the top with their dramatics. Mm-hmm. He seemed very real, very scary, kind of real. Bela Lugosi and Dwight Fry are the main reasons this movie is still talked about.
So iconic, yeah.
They're both iconic. They're both real. They seem very real. Like Bela Lugosi is Dracula. Dwight Fry is Renfield. And it method acting wasn't talked about at that time. You had natural actors like Paul Muni, like we mentioned, but those two. Conrad Veidt was another one. All those guys. And Lon Chaney, they were very real. They weren't over the top. They weren't hammy.
Yeah, no, and
he died pretty young too. I think he was only like 50.
Who's
Dwight Fry?
Dwight Fry.
He might have been a little younger.
Yeah, he had a heart attack, like a sudden heart attack, and unfortunately passed away. And
I would have loved to seen his career develop. Because he was always the secondary guy, but you remember him.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He probably, I don't know if he would have followed the same path as Klaus Kinski, probably less troubled.
Right.
But, Klaus Kinski started off playing bit parts that he stole the whole movie away from everyone else. Dr. Zhivago and all that kind of stuff. One wonders if Dwight Fry would have followed in a similar path. We'll never know.
Yeah, we'll never know. But from what I've read about Dwight Fry's career and what little there really is on it.
Right. There's not a lot out there.
Unfortunately, he kind of got typecast as the crazy character actor, So again, because he follows this movie up with probably his second best, if not tied with Renfield in Fritz with Frankenstein.
There's no compare. Renfield is because Fritz, he barely is in the movie. It's like a 10-minute part.
He makes about a half hour of the movie.
But he's literally 10 minutes of screen time total.
But still,
he makes an impact in a small amount of time.
But point I'm getting at is so he follows that up, and then you see him in a small cameo in Bride of Frankenstein,
right?
You'll catch him in smaller cameos in like House of Frankenstein,
right?
And a couple other ones. If you're not looking carefully in the background, you'll see him. And unfortunately, after these movies, that's kind of where his career went. He was, prominently, before Dracula, a stage actor as well.
Right.
So, unfortunately, and then his early death.
But he transitioned. A lot of those actors from the stage to screen don't always translate that well. But for some reason, Dwight Fry really made an impression. I watched those movies when I was a kid, and he always stood out. I always tried to mimic his maniacal laugh.
I mean,
Renfield.
Yeah, and everybody does. I mean, look at what they did with Renfield and with Mel Brooks, Dracula Dead and Loving It.
Right.
I mean, it's.
I haven't seen that, but
You've never seen it?
No, I'm aware of it though.
Hilarious.
But I heard there's a lot of homages to the.
Yeah, to all the Dracula movies, but
right.
I mean, it lays
especially the 1931.
It lays heavy on 1931. So there's your cast, and as you mentioned before, Lugosi kind of getting the real short end of the stick. I mean, Helen Chandler, I think she was making $2,500 a week.
Yeah, almost double what Lugosi was making.
Well, David Manners was getting like $1,500 a week.
I know, because he was. I think it was like she was the most known out of all of them, and then it was David Manners, and then the rest.
I mean, Lugosi, $500 a week. And you are the title, you are the lead, you are the face of this movie, and I mean, I don't know if there's a xenophobic bias there because he was Hungarian and couldn't really speak much. Who knows? But he was not treated with respect.
Well, that's the thing. Like we talk about Lugosi here for a second. Over in Hungary, he was
Valentino.
He was that big. There's pictures I've seen photo stills of him playing Jesus in Nazareth.
Yes.
He was also a romantic leading man in many Hungarian productions.
Yeah.
He was like Valentino.
Yeah,
And then him playing Dracula. Now if any Hungarian fans followed his film, they'd be like, "Wow, what an amazing actor. Such versatility."
Yep.
No one would have imagined over in Hungary him playing Dracula.
No.
Just from watching his other productions overseas.
Yeah, and unfortunately for Bela and what his son has alluded to over the years, and even Karloff to a degree in interviews, is he never quite grasped the English language, which is what really limited when he came over here. Like, he could speak English, but he still thought and processed things in his native tongue.
Right.
So when people were talking to him, I don't think he quite understood. I mean, again, he could figure out the lines and repeat the lines, but he had no idea what he was saying.
Well, that was using Gong Li, China's biggest star. She was in Miami Vice, and then she was in Hannibal Rising. She can't speak English, so she had to do it phonetically.
Yeah.
So, yeah, she had a little bit of easier time than Bela Lugosi did, though.
Yeah.
He just had a hard, difficult road. It was very unfortunate. It's a very sad story in a way.
Well, I mean,
he had a lot of success and he has a huge legacy.
Sure.
But at the time, it was very difficult for him. Because he didn't want to be. He wanted to be done with Dracula. After he was done with this, he never wanted to do it again, and he wanted to continue what he was doing in Hungary. Just trying to do these different type roles. And I think he was kind of hoping that he'd have the same kind of status as he did in his homeland. That's what I kind of assume. You've read more about Bela Lugosi than I have.
Yeah, he did. He didn't. Again, this is. You can call it bad luck, but again, Lugosi also shot himself in the foot a lot.
But because he wanted to do different things.
Yeah, but I think had he been a little bit more open to doing certain movies,
maybe
right after Dracula, just to kind of like Karloff did. Again, you can't really compare Karloff to Lugosi. There was two totally different people and thought totally different ways.
Yeah, Karloff embraced it, and
he embraced it, and he did his monster movies, and eventually later in his career, he got his more serious. He got his different types of roles.
Right.
Lugosi went from Dracula. He's like, well, I'm the second coming of Valentino. I don't need to be doing
overseas. He was, yeah.
Yeah, but he still pictured himself as that. Even after the success of Dracula in the States, he was like, all right, I'm the next Valentino. Give me something.
Right.
And that was the thing about,
One wonders, though, like he turned down, like him, Karloff, all of them turned down The Invisible Man. It's like, he could have potentially had a career like Claude Rains, maybe. We'll never know that because he didn't take the part, but it's always good to kind of like what if scenarios.
There's a lot of what ifs, and I know he was offered Invisible Man, but I mean, final say went to James Whale with that. Who knows if James Whale would have ever even wanted him at the time,
Right.
too.
So the shooting schedule, it was like, what, 36 weeks or something, 36 days? 36 days, yes.
36 days, they pump it out. Again, this was basically, what you saw on Broadway on film.
Yeah, other than the beginning sequences at Borgo Pass and Dracula's Castle, everything was done on the stage.
Yeah, I mean, obviously they took liberties to kind of flesh out the...
And that's what a lot of people have a problem with. It hasn't stood the test of time in that aspect.
Yeah.
I mean, Lugosi's and Dwight Frye's performance will always, they're timeless performances, and that's what will make the movie last thousands of years. But it's the stagey production, because I think people wanted maybe not to see the violence, but there's no like music either. That was another thing that was kind of a difficult thing. Like other than Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake, and there was another piece of music in the theater. Other than that, there was no music.
Music was...
it was very limited at the time. There wasn't like a... you didn't really have like, let's go to Ennio Morricone to do the score. Oh, let's go to Philip Glass, who would later do the 90s reconstruction of it. There was no John Williams or anything like that. There was really no film composer, if you will. Which there was a lot of stock companies and like that when it came to music. That would change later on in the decade, but at the time it was difficult to find a music score,
Yeah, and even if, to have, something original, it was so expensive. And we're also in the beginning of the Great Depression as well.
Yeah.
Money was not, the fact that
they got $400,000 for this production,
and that was
mind blowing.
Yeah,
that's like millions of dollars in today's standards.
Yeah.
What's interesting, I just want to make note that from what I'm reading here, I don't know if your information jives with it. It was very disorganized, from what I understand, and I guess the cinematographer Karl Freund. I guess he had to do. There's rumors that he did most of the shooting. Is that true from what you read?
From what I read, there was a rivalry between him and Todd Browning right from the start. They did not get along with each other. They did not like each other.
Carl
and Todd Browning.
Gotcha. They say he's like an uncredited director. That's what some people say.
Yeah, and again, it really depends on who you talk to back then. But I mean, like production notes and dailies all credit Todd Browning.
Yes.
So I mean, again, Karl Freud. He does go on to do The Mummy.
Right.
So he does get his shot, and The Mummy is basically a remake of Dracula, just set in ancient Egypt. Even all the way down to the Swan Lake opening.
Yeah. Well, Todd Browning had a hard time with music, anyways, from what I read.
Yeah, but again, music was so expensive there.
I know.
It's it really wasn't even thought of.
I hate to use Scorsese as an example, like Mean Streets, his first major movie. Most of the money went to the source music, like the Rolling Stones and stuff, and that's what cost most of the money for Mean Streets. Music still is at a very expensive commodity when it comes to filmmaking.
Right.
But at this point in time, there was no such thing as needle dropping, and that's as close as you can get is Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake. That's about it.
Yeah, and just sound alone was so brand new by this time. Today and as films progressed, there are boom mics and all sorts, different ways to light the stage. You watch Dracula, if you see a giant centerpiece in the middle of the scene, there's a microphone in there.
Right.
That's how they do.
That's why I love Singing in the Rain. I mean, if you're ever in a bad mood, that's like the best movie to watch. But it's interesting how it shows the process going from transitioning from silent to sound.
Yeah.
That movie has a lot of interesting aspects to it, and you wonder if that is 100%. They had a lot of fun with that.
But and I mean, again, there's
the synchronization.
Yeah.
And all that. It really delves into the transition from silence to sound filmmaking. It's sticking the microphone, walking away from the mic, and everything like that. If you ever wanted like a hilarious behind the scenes of how a movie is made, I think Singing in the Rain is the best movie to watch.
Well, and that's just the thing. Like if you're watching Dracula and you see all the characters kind of standing around talking, and there's a table with a centerpiece.
That's probably where the mic is.
The microphone's in the flowers.
Right.
That's where it's like you don't think about it, but once you know that, it's like, why is there a random flower display right in between everybody?
I don't ever
did it.
To me, it's not distracting. They did a great job of hiding it for the most part. But it's amazing how like you read it doesn't matter what movie you read about, all of the weird behind the scenes stuff, and it's made into like I'd still rate it like 4.5 stars because it's the atmosphere. I mean, I love the use of fog in the film. And again, I mean, it was limited budget. $400,000. Was a lot back then, but
the Great Depression, no less.
I know.
Yeah,
I know, but a lot of that, just like today, a lot of that budget went to the cast.
Sure. Yeah. Here's a interesting, thing to chew on. So at Universal, after Lon Chaney dies,
right?
Because Lon Chaney did his own makeup, they hired a permanent makeup artist.
Right. Well, the studios had like like a costume designer, a makeup person for all their movies.
And that man was named Jack Pierce.
Yes.
And we know who Jack Pierce was. Lugosi wouldn't let him work on him.
Isn't that funny?
Lugosi did not.
I read that. Yeah.
And part of me would have loved to see Jack Pierce's interpretation of what Dracula looks like.
Right.
But
we'll never know.
But Lugosi, he had his thing from Broadway. He did his own makeup. He put his own hairpiece on, and that was that. That was, what is now universally recognized as Dracula is what Lugosi gave us.
And he did such an amazing job.
Yes.
It was a blessing and a curse for him.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think later in his life, he really embraced it. But yeah, definitely.
He was buried in the Cape.
Oh, that was his wife's and his son doing. He never.
Oh, he never did that.
He never requested anything like that. They did that. They just thought it was appropriate. Given the his that was never a request of his.
Right.
But they did. Yeah, his son and his last wife. He had like 5 marriages.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a little thing that they decided to do. It was never anything that Bela wished himself for.
So we were talking about going back to the actual money that was put in. It was a big gamble, from what I understand, for Universal.
Yes, and
we were talking about how movies have different cuts.
Mm-hmm.
This one apparently had an 85-minute cut, and they chopped almost 15 minutes or actually about 10 and 11 minutes out. It was like 11 minutes that were gone. And I guess they had like a whole interlude with Edward Van Sloan.
Yes, just like he had in Frankenstein.
Yeah, but they said, we don't want them to believe in the supernatural. It's like...
Well, again,
But no one had ever seen anything like this before. That was another thing.
And that was it was controversial for one thing. You didn't have a bankable star like Lon Chaney,
right?
So you're basically going with an unknown, untried cast. Yeah, you're $40,000 budget in the Great Depression, and you're doing a movie that, unlike even the Chaney movies, the thriller movies of his time, where even like the cat and the canary, there was always some explanation at the end. It was something. It was something real,
human related. Yeah, Dracula
is the first time we really see they go all in on supernatural,
right?
And there's no explanation. It just is what it is. It's gothic horror,
right?
And that was a risk, and we have to thank Carl Laemmle Jr. because Carl Laemmle Sr. hated these movies. He wanted nothing. I mean, he loved his westerns and his comedies.
Yeah,
and that's what Universal Pictures was all about, unless it was a Chaney movie. So they really took a major gamble, and it paid off.
Yeah, thankfully, that would have bankrupted them.
It would have bankrupted them. I think they end up making like $12 million.
Yeah, altogether.
I mean, oh my God!
The premiere alone, it was over 700,000.
Yeah, and it's
it grossed like 12 million something.
Yeah, and it's just, again, this is the start of American horror, and this is where it all begins. I don't care what anybody else says. I know there were creepy movies before it, and there were Dracula is where our genre that we love, that took us through, the rest of the monster era into the atomic creature monster era that led us into the Hitchcock era, and then led us into the slasher era and the cycle. Everything that comes after it starts right here with Dracula 1931, and it's really important to recognize that.
Even
if
Toho,
you don't know it.
Toho's Godzilla, Monster, It took Monster to a whole new level.
And again, and the importance, you can see, the creative freedoms that they took with this movie.
Right.
Which leads to creative freedoms like King Kong, Godzilla, Frankenstein. And if it starts right here, people. It starts right here in 1931. And again, you read the Bram Stoker novel, Dracula is not as Lugosi is pictured.
No.
He is old.
No.
He is decrepit. Older, yes. He is creepy looking.
Right.
And he gets more youthful as the book goes on, but he never unlike, the 1992 Francis Ford Coppola where, he turns, Gary Oldman kind of turns into a handsome, love interest of Winona Ryder. Yeah. That does not happen in the book.
No.
He still remains an old, decrepit type, predator. And so, but what Lugosi does, and again, to this day, Halloween, every costume store you go to, you see, you go to the vampire section. Yeah. It's Widow's Peak, pale face, cape with the collar and medallion. Yeah. That is not Bram Stoker's Dracula. That is Bela Lugosi. Yes. The Hungarian accent is not Bram Stoker. It is Bela Lugosi. Right. And it's you don't even have to see this movie and you say Dracula. That's the image you have. Right, you without reading the book, without seeing the movie. That is your Dracula. Right. And for 93 years. This has been the bar, and the bar. I mean, we can talk about what movies are technically and maybe better, but the bar has never been touched, right? By from Lugosi, it just has.
All the Draculas I've seen, Christopher Lee's come the closest.
I would argue, I like Duncan Regehr and Monster Scott.
Well, he was good too. He kind of, again, his image was based on Lugosi's.
Yeah.
And he did a surprisingly great job. But I'm talking about all together. I think Christopher Lee. We'll talk about the Hammer films in a bit, but it's like Bela Lugosi is the Dracula.
He is Dracula.
My father liked Christopher Lee better. I think arguably the movies are better. Mm-hmm. The Hammer productions are better. They had a little more to work with than Universal did at the time. And
again, in
1930s, there was no blood splattering or anything like that. I mean, by the time the Hammer movies came out, they're the ones that started the blood and
Yeah,
oozing kind of blood coming out of the body, and
he even said, and we've talked about the Spanish Dracula, which was filmed simultaneously with this, and one can argue that that's even technically better.
It is
than the Lugosi film, but it just didn't have Lugosi.
Yeah, that was a thing. Like the Lugosi, I mean, the Renfield was not bad. It was interesting. Yeah, but I mean, you take. If you had those two guys in the Spanish production, that would have been a 5-star movie.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a much better movie. You get to see the wolves. It's more atmospheric, and it gets deep, deeper into the lore a little bit, and shows a little bit more, and
right.
And of course, not Mina, but Ava, a little more. What's the word? Voluptuous? Is that a good word to use?
Yep.
Yeah, on purpose.
Right. Well, I mean, again, when you have the benefit of watching the American crew do it all day and say, you know what, I'm going to do that better.
Yeah. Well, they used some of the same. There were some sequences that are the same, like the groaning at the end when Dracula's getting stabbed. Yeah. That's Lugosi's groan they used.
Yeah. Yeah.
But which that was interesting. Is that was one of the things that was cut was.
Yes,
the groaning and I think there were more seductive sequences in the 85-minute version of the Todd Browning Dracula that were cut. And I again, now in this day and age, it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that footage doesn't exist. But back then there were like fires, like you said.
There's fires, and again, film wasn't preserved.
It wasn't.
Like
it wasn't
today.
as important. There weren't people like Martin Scorsese and Spielberg going around. Oh, we got to preserve this. No.
Yeah. No, it was recycled or destroyed.
Yeah. Well, let's move. Let's make this film into the next one, or make it for shoes.
Yeah. Exactly. So I mean, wrapping up, the legacy of. Dracula 1931. I can't stress it enough that this is where our American horror genre begins.
Yeah,
and
let's talk about the Spanish one. Have you seen that one?
Yes. Yep.
What are your thoughts on that one? Again, I think overall, like you said, it is better made.
I think it was a better movie technically. Again, just the Lugosi presence alone.
Right.
Really hinders. I mean, visually, it's a better watch. But
there's more action. It's not as stagey.
Yeah, and like I said, I mean, that was kind of the funny thing about the Spanish Dracula is literally that crew would watch the Lugosi shoot all day and then film all night, purposely trying to better it,
and it did that, but again, the guy who played Dracula, Carlos Vieras.
Yes,
he did okay. Again, how do you top what Lugosi did? You can't.
No, you can't.
I mean, he did his own interpretation, and there are some of the same maneuvers he copied.
Right,
but it's the guy who played Renfield. He did an okay job of, he was a little over the top though.
Yep,
but. Again, if you had Dwight Fry and Lugosi in that production, it would have been perfect.
Right. I mean, to me, it's it's still a 5-star movie just because it's Dracula, man. It's it's. I
mean that one that one would get released in March. The Spanish Dracula.
Yeah, and they did do that. It didn't last long.
No.
They would do Spanish or German versions of the movies simultaneously to try to
did that.
Increase their dollars. Get more money out of a product.
They even did some silent versions of these too.
Well,
because not all of the theaters were equipped to have sound.
Yeah. So there is a silent version of Dracula,
that
silent
exists
edit
somewhere.
Yeah. And again, it's. The cool thing about the Spanish Dracula, in the last couple of episodes, we've talked about the late David J. Scull. He's one of the ones who pioneered and found, because the Spanish Dracula was lost for many, many years.
Right.
And
it was mainly just a curiosity thing for years, but no one was able to find it. Thanks to
David J. Scull, and his very first book, people, again, with his death, I don't know what the publication of his works are going to happen going forward, but his very first novel, Hollywood Gothic, he chronicles the film legacy of Dracula from Stoker writing it and the stage plays all the way up to I think like Dracula 2000.
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously, there's a heavy focus on the 1931 Dracula,
right?
The Spanish Dracula. Again, he finds, the copy. So and he had access to David Manners and all the other, the people who, when he wrote the book at the time, to talk about the production and who was left around in the 80s. So, if you're a Dracula fan, if you're a horror fan, or if you're just a fan of how movies were made back then, Hollywood Gothic by the late David J. Scull, read it. I've read it like 3 or 4. It's just fascinating how these movies were made.
Right.
And the wonderful thing about Mr. Scull was he took these movies very seriously. It's we've talked about how the film industry looks at horror movies and they kind of brush them aside as silly, non-serious. That was what was so nice about reading Mr. Scull's stuff, was he took it seriously and he made you feel it's okay to take these movies seriously, and you should take these movies seriously because they're very important movies to our culture and film legacy. And
that's the thing, like you were talking about the film industry, we've talked about it over and over again. They don't call The Exorcist a horror movie. Why not? Because it
was good. Because it was good.
It was powerful. It was okay, but it's a horror movie.
Right.
Cape Fear is a horror movie. Silence of the Lambs is a horror movie. Well, they're thrillers. Yes, but they're horror movies. It's okay to have horror movies get Oscar nominations. It's okay.
Right.
But they still don't think horror movies are good enough to be nominated for Oscars. I mean, there's so many great horror movies that get recognized and accolades. Some of them won the Palme d'Or. They don't get recognized for Oscars because, well, they're horror movies. Okay.
Yeah, right.
They're still great movies.
Exactly.
The Exorcist is powerful. It really is a powerful movie.
And
and Dracula was really good too.
Dracula is powerful. You see.
Today, Bela Lugosi probably would have been nominated for an Oscar.
Absolutely, 100%. I totally agree with that.
But it's a horror movie,
it's a horror movie. but I mean, at the time, it wasn't a horror movie because there was no horror genre,
right?
So it was in its own. It was like The Exorcist. Dracula comes out, and at the time, there was nothing like it.
No.
Just like there was nothing like The Exorcist when The Exorcist came out.
Right.
So, I mean, it was kind of in that category when it first comes out of, whoa, what is this?
Right.
And the audience kept coming back. And
almost felt like Marty McFly. You guys aren't ready for this, but your kids will love it.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we've covered a lot on the 31 movie.
Yeah, the Spanish version.
The lasting impact of Lugosi. Chris, you want to talk some of Hammer and Francis Ford Coppola?
Because let's take. I mean, Christopher Lee made a huge impact playing Frankenstein's monster, and of course he relishes the role of Dracula. Of course, he get tired of doing that after upteen different movies. Even though after saying that he did Jess Franco's Dracula, a couple years after, but it was before The Wicker Man, and his take on Dracula is incredible. What did you think of the 1958 Dracula?
I love horror Dracula.
Because it's called Dracula, and then it was called The Horror of Dracula in England.
Yeah,
which is interesting. How the Hammer movies were always a different title than the American title.
Right.
Like Night Creatures, for instance, was Captain Clegg over in England. It's The Horror of Dracula, I mean, that started and it was very, very successful.
It was very successful. I liked it because they kind of do their own thing with it.
Right.
They don't really follow the novel really at all.
Van Helsing and Harker and
they're vampire hunters, basically. And
He was very, very
specialized in like the occult and supernatural. Yes. But yeah,
he wasn't a vampire hunter. Like
and again, and Jonathan Harker, unlike the 31 movie where
he's kind of a weakling.
In the novel, John Harker goes to Castle Dracula.
Him and Quincy both kill Dracula in the novel.
Yeah, I mean, and Quincy it's a sidebar here. I was actually talking with my brother about the 31 movie. If you ever wanted to do like a tribute sequel, all right, and I'm going to give everybody a freebie here, and I probably shouldn't. Lucy, all right?
Yeah.
Now, in the book, Lucy comes back as a vampire and starts murdering children. 31 movie, though, she dies and nothing is said except for one little scene where they're reading about the woman in white.
Yeah, it was like...
And that's it.
Well, but one wonders, some of that 85 minute or that, the 10, 11 minutes that were cut, maybe there was some more with Lucy in that. We'll never know.
We'll never know. So based on what we got, filmmakers, Lucy is still out there.
Yeah.
So if you want to do a tribute Dracula sequel to 1931, they kill Dracula. Now they got to hunt Lucy. Come on. That's money.
Right. they already tried to do a money grab with Renfield. And that failed.
Don't get me started on Renfield. It's my birthday. I don't.
Nicolas Cage was good.
He wasn't bad. He wasn't bad.
He fit the material.
He did. I think I would have liked to see him in a more serious Dracula part. But I thought he had the look. He had the mannerisms. He had he could have done a good Dracula if he was allowed to take it seriously.
But getting back to the Hammer productions, what I liked about Hammer, it was 80 minutes, maybe 90 at the most, and that was it.
Yeah.
Done. And they took what Universal did, like we talked about with Frankenstein. They completely changed everything.
Yeah.
We're not going to do the same thing that Universal's doing. They expanded on it. How many times did Peter Cushing play Van Helsing? 15, 16 times.
Yeah.
Just like Frankenstein, he played Frankenstein like 15, 16 times too.
Yeah, and they kill him at every time, so it's a different, different generation of Frankenstein.
Yeah. Yeah. I love how the end of Curse of Frankenstein, he's set to be hanged. Oh, he doesn't get hanged, and it's just like Van Helsing, it's like in every movie. They even did. Do you remember the Shaw Brothers and Hammer cross production there? The Seven Brides of Dracula?
Yep.
You had David Chiang, one of the biggest Shaw Brothers star, doing Kung Fu and taking on the Brides of Dracula.
Right.
Where Dracula is only in it at 2 minutes at the beginning, and I think he shows up at the end, and that's it. Yeah. And it was a different guy playing Dracula because I think Christopher Lee was tired at that time of playing Dracula, only to revive it for Jess Franco.
Right. And I'll also mention too with Universal, they did do some Dracula sequels.
Yes.
There's Daughter of Dracula, which isn't a bad movie.
There was a Gloria Holden, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then Son of Dracula with Lon Chaney Jr., which again, this is past the Laemmle era of ownership of Universal, so it's just kind of a let's put it out that
fast food, just hey, we'll take this and this, put it together and churn it out. It's like butter, you churn it out.
I mean, Dracula and Daughter of Dracula still kind of fell under the category where it was gothic horror and they were trying to take it somewhat seriously, whereas not to say that Son of Dracula is not a bad movie, it was just it was a cookie cutter B movie they were producing at the time.
And there was the House of Dracula with John Carradine.
Yeah, and then Dracula makes an appearance in House of Frankenstein as well, a brief appearance. And then we get Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein, which fascinating enough, with how Lugosi is so synonymous with Dracula. His only second time on screen as Dracula.
Yeah, that was his last time as Dracula.
He was
though after he's like, I can't do it. He Mark of the Vampire. There was some other vampire type movies, but
and
he only played Dracula twice.
Yeah, he named Dracula. I mean, Mark of the Vampire, a couple other movies where he wore the costume, but he wasn't Dracula.
Yeah,
he was someone else. And then Universal would in 1976 remake Dracula with Frank Langella as Dracula. You had
Laurence Olivier as Van Helsing and
Donald Pleasant as Seward.
Yeah, was not that good.
They went romantic.
See, Frank Langella, he was great. I mean, Frank Langella is gold no matter what role he touches. I just wish they were in better movies. Because Frank Langella is one of the best actors.
Absolutely.
He's brilliant in everything.
He's the only reason to watch Masters of the Universe.
Yeah.
The only reason to watch Masters
Dolph
of the Universe.
Lundgren as He-Man. We're not going to get into Dolph Lundgren as He-Man. Oh, that was terrible. Because I think it came out a year before Rocky IV. I was like,
a year after.
Year after?
Yep.
I thought it came out in 87.
They wouldn't have known who he was after without Rocky IV. Because there's actually a funny story. Stallone going into canon and seeing the poster for Masters of the Universe and asking the heads of who's playing He-Man, and they say Dolph Lundgren. He goes, "Really, that guy? He can't even speak English."
Mm-hmm. maybe Rocky IV came out in 89. I thought it came out earlier. But.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah. So Christopher Lee, back to Hammer.
Yeah, Christopher Lee, and there was some, like you were saying, how Lugosi played a vampire a few times, not calling it Dracula. Right. There were some Italian films that Christopher Lee was in the 60s and 70s. You can't call it Dracula. Okay, yeah. They were like puzzled. So I mean, there was vampire movies that Christopher Lee was in Italy where. He wasn't Dracula, although there was Dracula and Son in 1971 or 1970 or 71, early 70s. That was another one where it was more of a comedy. Did you ever watch that one?
Yeah. Once, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And at this time, Dracula still wasn't public domain either. So that's why it was so hard. Now it's public domain. You can put Dracula literally on anything, and make your movie as long as you're not infringing on any imaging of Lugosi and that sort of thing.
All that, yeah. But yeah, it's Christopher Lee. He's so synonymous playing Dracula. That's probably his most famous role was Dracula. I mean, he did it so many times, but he wanted to get out of it, and he played in there's like some very obscure Christopher Lee stuff. Other than The Wicker Man, which is his favorite role, there was another role he really cherished playing, and it was some Indian political figure, which is like, whoa. Yeah. He's Christopher Lee, the monster character, playing a role like that, and the movie is such an obscure find. Jinnen, I think, is the name of it. And it just barely got a release on Blu-ray. It's the only time it's ever been available on home video. So it's a limited edition, so it's probably sold out now. But if you're a Christopher Lee fan, you want to see something other than Dracula. Although Severin Films is getting ready to release their Jess Franco's Dracula, and I think... I think 88 Films overseas is going to be re-releasing that as well. So there's 4K too.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's plenty of options to see Christopher Lee as a vampire or Dracula. I mean, a lot of the Hammer films have already been released on Blu-ray. So I mean, there's plenty of Christopher Lee Dracula for you to savor and enjoy.
Yeah,
if you will. But yeah, the closest to the book though is, believe it or not, Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Yeah,
and I think he emphasized that because again, Arthur Homewood, or he's never even mentioned in any of the movies other than that one,
right?
And Cary Elwes did an interesting take on him, and then Quincy is again in this movie as well. Dr. Seward is actually trying to court Lucy,
right?
She's not like the daughter of one of the characters or anything like that, which is always interesting. It kind of insinuates something going on between Seward and Lucy in the Todd Browning Dracula, but it's just like there, and it's never mentioned. Lucy is such a throwaway character, but in the novel she was much more and
way more important. Way more important. She's kind of I would even go to say that like her character is more important than Nina as far as the vampire,
Right.
You know, I mean, because I mean, by the end, Dracula's trying to turn Nina, but I mean, the bulk of the novel and it's Lucy that's
right
wreaking havoc,
right.
You know,
and Van Helsing and Harker are the ones who do the deed and get rid of Lucy.
Yeah,
and Coppola's movie follows the book quite closely, and then it falls apart and gets disastrous at the end.
Sure,
which is unfortunate because the whole movie was great. It was actually Coppola's best movie since Apocalypse Now. It really is. I know my wife loves The Outsiders. It's got a cult following, and it wasn't bad. Godfather 3 was okay, but this was actually really solid.
Right.
It was actually a very solid movie. It just fell apart in the final act, which is unfortunate.
What did you think of Gary Oldman as Dracula?
Gary Oldman was really good, but again, it's like, you know, I constantly think of Bela Lugosi. It's
Right.
unfortunate. Even Christopher Lee, is he as good as Lugosi? No, but it's still very entertaining. Gary Oldman he gets really into any role he does, and I guess at the time he was going through a divorce when he was doing Dracula, so there were Winona Ryder and him didn't get along the best, but I guess they rekindled years later and became good friends afterwards.
Oh, good.
But she understood this was a rough time. And that was another thing that would have made Godfather 3 a whole lot better. And, you know, casting his daughter as Michael's daughter was a big mistake. That hampered the movie. Winona Ryder was supposed to play that part, but she was doing something else at the time and she couldn't do it. And then he cast this model to play Michael's daughter, and then she gets killed tragically. Like a hotel room, knock on the door, bang, dead. So it goes to his daughter. I mean, it goes to, you know, it's very tragic. I think Godfather 3 would have been a whole lot better with Winona Ryder, but it was great she did a decent enough job playing Mina in the Bram Stoker's Dracula.
You know, just kind of going through this cast as we went through Dracula 31. Not that we're trying to compare it, but Anthony Hopkins as Van Helsing.
Liam Neeson was supposed to play.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think he would have done. I thought Anthony Hopkins was over the top.
You think?
Yeah. I mean, the only reason the studio went with him is because of how successful Silence of the Lambs was.
Right.
I mean, after Silence of the Lambs, Anthony Hopkins got all these roles. Some were better than others.
Right.
And this one, it was like, it was a better movie than Free Jack, which also came out that year. But
right.
Anthony Hopkins, I thought, was totally wrong for Van Helsing. Someone of Liam Neeson's stature would have been great.
Yeah.
I mean, it would have been an Irish accent with it, but it would have been fine. The only movie that Liam Neeson didn't have an Irish accent was Schindler's List.
Right.
Every movie, though, you've noticed he has an Irish accent, even when he's playing a Russian. So
right.
No, but I nitpick on Bram Stoker's Dracula. Coppola's. It's still a very solid 4-star movie. It just falls apart in the final act. I mean, Lucas is the one that suggested Mina cutting off the head and stabbing.
It's really,
yeah. I mean, Quincy still does the stabbing.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I think she does. I just saw it the other night. I always forget because I hate the final act. It's just it's so troublesome. It's like, okay, George Lucas is like, yeah, have her do it, and it's like, okay,
yeah.
Harker's the one that is there at the beginning, and he should be there at the end. And
sure.
he's and Keanu Reeves was terrible as Jonathan.
I was just going to bring him up. You know,
it was such a terrible.
He's the one thing that no one really likes about.
Yeah, I don't like Anthony Hopkins either as Van Helsing. I mean, very troublesome, some of the casting choices, and even Winona Ryder to a certain degree. Wrong. I mean, these were popular actors at the time.
Right.
Not necessarily the right people for the role. Gary Oldman was great, though.
Yeah.
Gary Oldman was solid as Dracula. But it's like, I mean, Richard E. Grant is always a pleasure, no matter what type of role. I mean, he could have played any role in the movie, and he would have crushed it.
Right.
I mean, him playing Seward was great. You know, Tom Waits He actually does a lot of the grunts in the movie. Do you know that?
Oh no, I didn't. That's cool.
Yeah, I mean, well, his music. That's grunts the whole time.
Yeah.
And Tom Waits he was interesting choice as Renfield. That's for sure.
Yeah. Yep.
But overall, I mean, Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula is the most faithful to the actual Bram Stoker book. Mm-hmm. And if it wasn't for the casting choices and the troublesome ending, it would have been the perfect Dracula movie.
Yeah.
Even more perfect than the Universal 1931. But unfortunately, that last act and some of those casting choices were less than desirable.
Right. All right. Well,
we've talked about Dracula. I mean, there's so many other Dracula movies like Dracula 2000.
Yeah.
And the last long, boring voyage of the Demeter, which was terrible. Very bad movie, but no one else liked it either because it bombed. Right. It just was terrible. It was no one asked for it, and
well, I mean,
and Renfield was another one that bombed. I think they wanted to try to. With Renfield, they wanted to spark a new franchise, and
yeah, we could do a whole show on how I feel about how Universal has treated these legacy characters that they've had over the last 20 years, and it's
Tom Cruise and the Mummy.
It's disheartening. It's disrespectful. I mean, as much as I liked, I thought Nick Cage did an okay job as Dracula. I found it extremely insulting to see him superimposed over Bela Lugosi in those first images, the flashback. I mean, literally, and again, I know, I'm super passionate about these movies, and it just made me so sick to my stomach to see. He was
the only good part about that movie, but again, that movie was terrible.
The movie was terrible, but again, to just reshoot the damn thing. Don't superimpose someone over another person's art,
or just not have that at the beginning.
Yeah. And again, you're basically spitting in the face of Bela Lugosi.
I don't see it that way, but it was
extremely disrespectful. It was imposed over Lugosi.
We disagree on that, but we both agree it's a terrible movie.
Yeah.
So I mean, it didn't need to be made. Since when in Renfield no martial arts, and it was just so absurd.
Right.
I mean, I know it was supposed to be fun, but Nicholas Hoult didn't seem like he was having fun playing the part.
No.
It would have been one thing if you found someone who played Renfield with the same type of goofiness and hamminess as Nicolas Cage's Dracula, it may have been more entertaining, but it was like...
But again, I mean...
Aquafina? What the heck? It's like, oh.
Yeah, but you know what?
It's terrible.
I'll get into a little... what's the problem with taking these things a little bit seriously? All the movies that, since the quote-unquote dark universe that they've tried to launch, because everyone's got to copy Marvel, even though you established the original cinematic universe with your monsters. Besides that, we got to do what Disney does, even though we're Universal and we're in competition with them in every which way or form. We got to do what Disney does. And again, to not take these legacy characters seriously drives me absolutely insane. We got an Invisible Man movie that had nothing to do with the Invisible Man. Yeah, you had an invisible person in it.
Hollow Man and the Invisible Man were both invisible.
But Hollow Man was more Invisible Man than that Invisible Man. I mean, if you read the H.G. Wells book, at least it kind of follows that to a degree.
I didn't even dare watch The Invisible Man. I'm such a snob.
I watched it. I hate going political. It was literally a Me Too grab. That's all it was. The movie that they were supposed to be remaking and had nothing to do with the H.G. Wells book. It just had an invisible person. They put the title Invisible Man on it.
This is a cash grab.
To put your butt in the seats.
Right.
And that was it.
Right.
And the same thing with the Mummy with
Tom Cruise.
Tom Cruise. It was just, it probably wouldn't have been bad if you didn't put Tom Cruise in it.
Tom Cruise was not the problem with the movie. That he was not the problem. The whole plot was the problem. It was a disaster from the start of the movie to the finish.
Yeah.
They were trying to, with Van Helsing, with Hugh Jackman, they were trying to recreate a whole new universe that Universal started. The Van Helsing movie bombed, so let's pick it up a decade later with Tom Cruise is not the problem with the movie. It's the movie itself. It was terrible.
Yeah. And you know what drives me nuts the most is Guillermo del Toro goes to Universal and says, I want to remake Creature from the Black Lagoon. And Universal says no. So what does he go? He goes to another studio, changes the names around, makes Shape of Water, and wins Best Picture.
Well, it's not the same as Creature from the Black Lagoon.
It's
creature-wise, but the plot is completely different.
The thing was, it was intended to be a remake, so he took it and changed it.
Julie Adams did not have sex with a creature.
No, I know. But I'm just saying, like, the difference between what Universal is doing and someone who takes characters like those seriously, you can tell the quality of the movie. He's going to do it again with Frankenstein. He said, I want to remake Frankenstein, and Universal said no. So now he's gone off to Netflix, and he's going to do it again.
Yeah. We'll
he's
see.
going to do it again.
Del Toro's hit or miss, unfortunately, with his movies.
But he's got the passion for the monsters.
He's very creative.
Yeah.
I would have loved to seen his vision of The Hobbit. Because unfortunately, you got two creative geniuses like Peter Jackson and Guillermo del Toro fighting. Peter Jackson fires him, keeps some of his ideas, and makes a mess of a trilogy of The Hobbit, it would have been so much better either A, Peter Jackson just does his own thing, or if Guillermo del Toro did his own thing.
Right.
Because it's a mess. Because he keeps some of the del Toro ideas because he still gets script credit.
Right.
So it's like, okay, they kept some of his ideas. It's a mess. It really is a mess.
And they're even doing it right now. They're about, in 2025, they're about to open a new theme park called Universal's Epic Verse. I'm excited about it. But they're starting to kill me on it because it's going to be like Islands of Adventures, several different themed areas of the park. Well, one is going to be Dark Universe, Universal Monsters, Classic Monsters, and they just released the re-imaging of all the monsters. Now, I understand needing to re-image the monsters for copyright reasons if you don't want to pay the Karloff, the Lugosi, the Cheney estate for whatever reason. I understand the logic in that, but I'm not being sexist here. But they've turned Dr. Frankenstein into a woman. Now,
really? In the new Universal Studios?
Yeah. So
wow.
Dr. Frankenstein will be a woman.
Well, there was a Lady Frankenstein movie.
Yeah. Problem with this is, to me, it disrespect. If you're honoring the legacy of these characters, you're cutting out the knees of the very important female characters that these movies,
right,
like Julia Adams, important character in Creature from the Black Lagoon, the Bride of Frankenstein, played by Elsa Lanchester, very, very important female character in this universe.
Very strong-minded, too, because she rejects him.
Yeah.
That was a big thing.
Dracula's daughter. You already have very strong, influential female leads. Why do we have to change a character? Why can't we celebrate what's already been there?
Right.
And elevate them. That's just my personal opinion. I would love nothing more to see a brand new Julia Kay from Creature from the Black Lagoon come back as a very powerful, very influential female role model for women all over of all ages. But no, what we'll do is we'll just take a character that's been around for 200 years and change his gender.
They were talking about doing that with James Bond too, and that backfired on him big time. So it's unfortunate that they do this, but let's just enjoy the fact that we still have the legacy of Bela Lugosi as Dracula. 93 years, and it'll probably be around for at least another 93. Whether they try to take away the gender, try to suppress it so no one sees it, we will still remember Bela Lugosi as Dracula. Todd Browning, he had a difficult time with sound, but between this and Freaks, he's got quite a legacy of his own. Just even if those are the only two movies Todd Browning made, still quite the legacy. So Dracula, 1931. Unfortunately, the Spanish version of Dracula, as far as I know, it was never released on Blu-ray, unless I'm mistaken.
It's on Blu-ray.
It is on Blu-ray. They just announced a 4K release of the Universal Monsters, but unfortunately, the Spanish version of Dracula was not on that, which is unfortunate, but at least you could still get the Blu-ray, which is still better quality than DVD. But there's so many options, you can stream, you can buy the Blu-rays, the DVDs of all of the Dracula movies pretty much that we've mentioned. So Dracula, 1931, Bela Lugosi lives on.
We'll see you next time on Scared for Reals.